Katu Veo wastelanders, welcome to the Lost Holotapes channel, where we discuss history of Fallout regions. Today we will start talking about the settlements and factions of the Appalachia Wasteland, the territory of Western Virginia presented to us in the truly first multiplayer installment of Fallout, Fallout 76. Despite the scandalous nature of its release, the abundance of bugs and the flow of fair criticism, the history of the region itself and the study of the world is a golden seed, although it is incredibly confusing. The history of the Appalachian region is the most dramatic and complex among all the others. Casual relationships, motivations and personalities of historical characters, complex political games of major factions, it is more like reading a book. It is not Fallout Brotherhood of Steel where, shit, let's go get the bad guys because they're bad. Moreover, the form of narration in the form of left notes, holotapes and terminal entries turns Fallout 76 into a truly detective game, and I adore it for that. I spent days taking notes on the wall, connecting them with the threads, trying to recreate the most accurate picture of what happened, and I will start sharing my interpretation today. I assure you, you will not find more accurate and complete history of the Appalachian Wasteland even on the wiki. But let's start with the general, with the geography of the region. In real life, it occupies the territories of 3 states, West Virginia, Virginia and Maryland. At the same time, the developers went really far in trying to distort the real prototype of the territory and decided to turn it all into West Virginia, leaving almost nothing from the other 2 states. A very strange decision to perceive, given that all states exist in the world of Fallout. More critically, the cities of exclusively West Virginia were used as prototypes in principle, and they have their own locations changed in relation to each other. Watauga, Huntersville in real life are in the western part, Morgantown is much northern of Grafton, and Sutton is under Flatwoods. Appalachia is divided into 6 unique subregions in terms of habitat. The forest is rich in vegetation and with relatively calm fauna, located on Allegheny Plateau. Toxic Valley is an area where rivers and lakes have turned into acidic radioactive baths and fumaroles. Ash Heap is a former mining region in which ash and combustion products are constantly released into the atmosphere, making the region very difficult to settle in. The Mire is a swampy area that has turned into a jungle shrouded in poisonous fumes and inhabited by extremely aggressive fauna. It has a border with the capital wasteland that passes through the Raven Rock Mountains. Savage Divide is an elevated mountain region formed directly by the Appalachian Mountains. Cranberry Bog is characterized by an abundance of bizarre mutated flora and progressive erosion, turning the land in the region into trenches. The wasteland borders the capital wasteland to the east along the Appalachian Trail, along its northern part, inside the state of Maryland. On the western side, the wasteland is bounded by the Ohio, Big Sandy and Tag Fork rivers, which are state borders at the same time. Before moving on to an exciting post-war detective story, we need to discuss some of the exposure of the region until October 2077. The main leitmotif of the pre-war plot is the desperate struggle of the proletariat against capitalism. Widespread robotization and automation deprive people of jobs and livelihoods, which caused Appalachia to be in state of local civil war on the eve of the Great War. While the Sin-American War in Alaska was going on, the hard-working regions languished in the rear. Industrial enterprises inflate the production rate, lower wages, force labor to overwork, reduce all costs associated with the production safety, and everything like that. But work is work, especially in such difficult times. And of course, no one cares about such trifles as environmental pollution. For example, with the permission of the government, Grafton Steel Mill openly drains production waste into the rivers and lakes of the northern part of the region, which in the future will contribute to the drainage of the region, the destruction of its entire flora, and its transformation into a toxic valley. However, things get much worse when capitalists begin to introduce robots into enterprises everywhere, depriving people of jobs. In addition, diligent mining companies, in particular Hornwright Industrial, began to demolish the south of the region, blowing up mines for faster ore extraction, as well as cynically producing a local natural landmark, Blair Mount. It competed with its main competitor, the Garrahan Company, for the volume of ore production. Because of such activity, living in the region has become impossible. Underground fires, incredibly polluted air, poisoning and soil erosion. The town of Welch was badly affected in particular. People, mostly miners, staged their riot. Demonstrations and rallies were brutally suppressed. For example, strike-breaker robots were sent to the city of Beckley. The rebels even organized guerrilla operations. It is noteworthy that at the heart of the struggle is a real historical prototype, the Battle of Blair Mount, which took place in 1921 as part of the miners' war for their rights. During this uprising, 10–15,000 miners fought for 5 days against an army of private detectives and police officers until the president and the military intervened. An epic story described in detail in Wikipedia, I recommend reading it. In addition to the aggravation of the situation in the mining region, uprisings occurred in other parts of Appalachia. Thus, the robotic city of the future, Watauga, built in 2042, the construction of which destroyed jobs and the local economy, was subjected to a terrorist attack. A leading specialist timidly launched a virus that forced all robots to become aggressive towards people. The army of Protectrons and Assaultrons staged a massacre in the city the day before the start of the Great War, leaving the residents with no chance of survival other than by fleeing the city. The reason why the Cranberry Swamp is so radioactive and mutinized is another mining company, AMC, Atomic Mining Company, whose headquarters was located in Watoga and which used nuclear charge to extract ultraseed in the region. AMC has agreed with the Poseidon coal-fired power plant in Charleston to process the ultraseed at their facilities. Because of this, the employees of the station rebelled and came out with a rally. The arrived military used the gas patented by Hallucinogen Inc. to suppress the uprisings to disorient the protesters, but the gas turned them into manic psychos who staged ultra-violence. The savage crowd tore apart both the soldiers and the authorities inside the station. Again, this happened shortly before the war and there was no one from the authorities to respond to the incident. Well, we have finally come to the most delicious, the history of the region after the Great War. Working with the lore of the region is a completely detective theory. It was very difficult to reconstruct the history as a huge part of it had to be built on logical chains rather than be guided solely by the actual data from the notes. Moreover, I found developer errors and some events mutually exclusive. There are also a lot of errors and contradictions on the official wiki, so you are unlikely to find such a complex story that is being told here. What is noteworthy is that the game is still being updated, and Bethesda with new updates introduces a bunch of new historical lore and also allows itself to change the lore already released earlier. Therefore, it is quite possible that something will be changed over the time with the release of new Fallout 76 updates. By tradition, we will begin to discuss the region with vaults. Vault 51 is located near the town of Friendly. Its experiment was to identify the best overseer from a motley number of candidates, of which there were 52 people, using the ZAC supercomputer. People arrive at the vault within a week before the bombs fall. One of the first arrivals was Sergeant Robert Baker, who was appointed responsible for advising ZACs on the choice of the method of appointing an overseer. Vault 63. So far the location is not available to players and there is no lore associated with it either, so neither its fate nor the experiment is known yet. Vault 76 near Flatwoods, one of the few control vaults that was supposed to remain closed for 25 years. Its inhabitants are brought up in the atmosphere of exclusivity so that they can make America great again. Vault 79, the entire gold reserve of America from Fort Knox was brought inside. The Secret Service detachment of 120 people remained with the gold reserve. Vault 94, the experiment was to test how the most peaceful group could adapt to possible aggressive groups during the post-apocalypse. For this purpose, a peaceful religious commune was chosen as the residence. Vault 96 is one of the cryogenic research centers. Thousands of animals and 5 scientists were placed in it. Their task was to conduct genetic research, the number of which was determined by the quota system issued by the supercomputer's mainframe. Quotas were constantly increasing in numbers, and if a scientist didn't carry out all the research, then the system would have them killed. Burkittsville Vault. Its number, experiment and fate are unknown. Till Vault 107 appears in the Fallout lore, we will use this exact number, as one of the closest ones. Although it is mentioned in the Fallout 3 lore, Burkittsville falls more into the territory of the Appalachian Wasteland. When the Great War began, because John Connor didn't succeed to stop Skynet, a huge number of people found themselves in various shelters. I would say that no other game in the Fallout series tells in such detail about the first days of the wondrous new world. Riverside Manor, the pre-war mansion of the Rivers family, consisting of Shannon Rivers, her husband Frederick Rivers, and her daughter Olivia Rivers. Shannon was an actress and played the superhero Mistress of Mysteries in movies. Frederick was an excellent engineer who turned the basement of the mansion into a training camp with all the necessary equipment, a kind of analog of Batman's cave. Groups of people met the war at the high-cost ski resorts of Pleasant Valley and Spruce Knob. There were 3 missile silos in the region, Alpha, Beta and Charlie, which was supposed to bring down their arsenal on China. As a consequence of the fact that there was a fabulous general in Alpha who did not read the instructions, spent his rocket launch card and entered the wrong code. In Beta, the general was absent from the station at all, and Gamma was evacuated before the start of the Great War due to a false radiation leak alarm. Missiles were not fired at China from Appalachia. Vault-Tec simulation at Vault-Tec University. Students could train to become overseers. Before the war, the overseer was supposed to be a student, Drew Collingsworth, who wanted to conduct an experiment with edible pasta, which was supposed to replace food supplies. However, the dean of the university wanted to conduct his own experiment and ordered to add a slow poison to the food that could destroy blood vessels and test people's reaction to the death from food. He was counting on a riot and a subsequent evacuation. When the bombs fell, no one in the simulation realized what had happened. However, one of them died on the same day. Kirwood Mine, since AMC was developing ultraseed by nuclear underground blast in the region, on October 17 during another underground explosion the old mine collapsed, killing 17 people and burying 32 more. They met the war underground. Glass Caverns is a mine of AMC for the extraction of ultraseed. During the war there were miners in it, but the mine itself withstood the bomb blasts outside. Allegheny Asylum, a psychiatric hospital close with a scandal, to which teachers and students from Watoga came on an excursion. Burrows, all underground catacombs, sewers and storm shelters under the city of Harper's Ferry. Even before the war, many squatters lived there, who were constantly kicked out. During the war, many residents of Harper's Ferry took refuge there. White Springs Bunker, a bunker for congressional representatives and the political establishment. About 200 people were evacuated in the summer of 2077. Among the evacuees was Thomas Eckert, the Minister of Agriculture, who was in Enclave, as well as Jefferson Gray, his right-hand man and an operative of Enclave. The bunker was controlled via Modus, a supercomputer with powerful artificial intelligence, an analog of Zax. Arctos Pharma is a pharmaceutical and genetic laboratory. When the bombs fell, the scientists continued to do research and genetic experiments, refusing to evacuate. Eastern Regional Penitentiary is a prison where convicts were wearing collars that could explode if they tried to escape. The management came up with this method of control, wanted to save money on guards and even on the maintenance of the prison, including repairs of the wall. Among the inmates was Harrison Malone, a recidivist and the leader of a robbery gang. Sons of Dane Compound of the Sons of Dane, who are a group of anti-government survivalists led by Dane Rogers. They moved to the camp on October 20th. There are two bases of the Chinese Liberation Army in the region. There was Mama Dolce canned factory in Morgantown, which was a cover for the Virginia Intelligence and Research Base. There was also a base called the Deep, located deep in the mountain range. The Chinese military inside the bases did not know that China would treacherously drop bombs on the states, so they were caught off guard themselves. 6 members of Lieutenant Elizabeth Taggarty's detachment, called Taggarty's Thunder, who took part in military exercises, found shelter in Spruce Knob Lake Cave. A Buddhist temple, Palace of the Winding Path, was built in the mountains, which even before the war was supposed to become a commercial asylum for the New Age movement. For a battle spiritual experience, a special narcotic gas was let through the ventilation. The attendees of the center survived the war in it. The White Springs is a pre-war ultra-expensive resort and the golf club standing above the Enclave bunker. Unrelated in any way to the politicians who evacuated to the bunker beneath, 96 people of guests and staff took refuge in the main building of the resort during the war. A couple of years before the start of the war, West Tech Company built a laboratory near the town of Huntersville. For a while they were kidnapping people from the town and were experimenting on them. In particular, they created the grafting monster in the laboratory. By 2076, experiments had reached a new level and the whole town of Huntersville was infected. When the inhabitants began to mutate into super mutants, the city was quarantined, and the military took the city into cordon. At the very center of West Tech, at the time of the war, the scientific staff took refuge. In the city of Berkeley Springs, residents of the city are evacuated to the Berkeley Springs Clinic. A detachment of US Army Firebat Squad was stationed inside Monongah Power Plant to guard the facility. Another group of US Army soldiers takes refuge in the Wendigo Cave. People also take refuge in Iron Hole Homestead, New River Gorge Resort, Heaven Church, Dolly Sods Children's Boy Scout Camp. In Western Maryland Correctional Facility in Cumberland, prisoners and guards are sheltering during the war. Before the war, there was a major anti-government anarchist group in the region called Free States, who have completely lost confidence in the American government. They were paranoid about the government's Vault-Tec program, and for good reason. Even before the war, they began to collect supplies, weapons, and build their own bunkers on the territory of the Fisher Mire. Despite the pressure of politicians, police harassment, and conflicts with the administration of the city of Harper's Ferry, which became their focal point, they were able to predict quite accurately when the apocalypse will occur and evacuated on advance to their bunkers. So far, 11 bunkers are known. The bunker of Singh family, of Niraj and Abby Singh, father and daughter who were talented radiomechanics. The bunker of Raleigh Clay, who was the leader of the Free States. Sam Blackwell bunker. Sam Blackwell is a former US congressman and Raleigh Clay's best friend. Before the war, he put sticks in the wheels of mining companies, preventing them from carrying out robotization, and also revealed the corruption scheme of the then Minister of Agriculture, Thomas Eckert. But politics is politics, and by denigrating him publicly for his connection with the Free States, as well as threatening violence against his daughter, the ill-wished forced Sam to hide in his bunker long before the war. The Sunday Brothers cabin, which belonged to the Sunday Brothers, JD and Jesus. Ella Ames bunker. Ella Ames is the chief medical officer of the Free States. Presumably Cora's bunker, which is referred as abandoned bunker in the game. The Carson family bunker. Jeremiah's bunker, which is referred as a ransacked bunker, as well as the mentioned Emma's bunker north of the Mount Thunder power plant, Eddie Hayes bunker, and Gavin McCulloch cabin. Orwell Orchard bunker. The Orwell family of farmers built it under their own orchard and equipped it in a way that some Vault-Tec vaults couldn't afford for themselves. There was a gym, a swimming pool, a bar, a projector room, many rooms of various functions, and high ceilings. And it was despite the fact that the farm was basically bankrupt. An employee of Vault-Tec was promised a place in the vault but later got rejected, dug out a makeshift vault. Near Vault 51 there was a small Vault-Tec bunker, which was used as the sales office. When the bombs fell, there were sales managers inside. In the region there was an underground secret enclave research station J in the northwestern part of the forest. The center was a large multi-level underground base. A group of scientists of Bishop Company survived the war in a railway tunnel near Harper's Ferry tunnels, which they used as a laboratory for the study of water samples from the Potomac River. The region was not badly affected by the direct bombing, so many cities survived. Many residents did not even go anywhere. Again, due to the fact that the history of the region does not succeed 25 years, the exposition of the cities is given in great detail. Thus, at least the following cities survived during the war. Charleston, the capital of West Virginia. Immediately after the war, the Charleston emergency government was formed, headed by Tanner Holbrook, the man who became acting governor, and Abigail Poole, the acting mayor of Charleston. These two do not get along well with each other and often make contradictory decisions. An autonomous group of volunteer responders is also being formed in the city. Their goal was to save and help those who are in need. Abigail was a friend to them, but Tanner tried to ignore them, being carried away by flirting with political circles. The leader of the responders is Maria Chavez. Morgantown, the city, the center of which is the University of Valtech and which largely consists of students, fell into anarchy after the war. For some time it is kept under the control of the tough hand of the Sheriff Mayfield and the Charleston government. Lewisburg. In general, the city is experiencing the apocalypse perfectly thanks to the having gardens on the roofs of houses. With their help, residents get an overview of the terrain, the opportunity to breathe fresh air and grow food. In addition, the city lives with constant festivals and competitions, which keeps its morale at high level. Harper's Ferry, a city at the intersection of the Potomac and Shenandoah rivers. Huntersville is a city where residents were turned into supermutants. During the war, the Allegedly broke through the cordon and massacred the military. They remain to live in the city, though. The cities of Flatwoods, Clarksburg, Helvetia, Sutton, and Beckley have also survived. Although there is no direct evidence confirming the survival of the latter, it can be assumed that the city survived by the presence of erected scaffolding and all sorts of structures linking dilapidated buildings. An unnamed bog town in the vicinity of Watauga, which, because of it, turned out to be abandoned before the war and became a haven for squatters. There is no information whether the cities of Monongah, Welch, Point Pleasant, Grafton, Summersville, and Tanagra survived the war. Watauga fell before the war. Tanagra is the only fictional city among all of them. Of course, we are talking about the cities that are represented in the game itself, although conditionally many locations and settlements belong to a certain city in the lore. For example, the West Virginia Lumber Company is located in the city of Friendly, and mega mansions are in the city of Bramwell, which are not presented in the game themselves. On October 23, 2077, a hail of nuclear warheads hit the world. Cities have been destroyed, millions have died, and society has fallen. We have reviewed the list of settlements that survived the nuclear holocaust. Now let us see how the situation developed in the future, end of 2077. When the bombs fell, evacuation began, and the commune headed to Vault 94 on 2 buses. Unfortunately, one of them was late, and an undercover employee of the Valtech, embedded into the commune, had to close the gear doors, dooming the second bus to death. Nevertheless, the group thrived. They had a gag that kept their internal farm working. After the bombs fell, the Sons of Dane got out. Celebrating their survival, they were loud, having fun with beer and music every evening. Due to the loss of the bomb launch card, the Alpha Silo was no longer useful. The fabulous general gathered all the personnel and led them to serve their country in some other place. A group of military personnel left the Alpha Silo. Since the general never arrived at Beta Silo, the entire station staff decided to evacuate on their own. On October 29th, Tigrity makes contact with her longtime comrade in the service, Captain Roger Maxson, who is waiting out the nuclear winter with his Renegade division at the Mariposa Base in California. On October 30th, scientists are leaving West Tech, having presumably neutralized the vats of VIV. Wow, what responsibility has awakened in them. The subjects in the VTU simulation learn about the autopsy result of the deceased colleague and realize that they are all poisoned. They demand from the overseer Drew to call for help and urgently stop the simulation. When they cannot get any response from the outside, they think that the overseer Drew didn't call for help deliberately, although in fact everyone outside the complex was no longer up to simulation. Simulation participants raise a riot, and after November 2nd, having failed to get to Drew, who barricaded himself in the room, they die. Drew dies of starvation too, though. In addition, after November 2nd, a group that took refuge in the New River Gorge resort dies. November 5th, a Horizon plane crashes near Helvetia. By November 6th, the last miners in the flooded Kerwood mine are dying. November 11th, an early formed raider group attacks the clinic in Berkeley Springs, which was already in a state of agony with a huge number of refugees and wounded, a meager supply of provisions, medicines gradually deserting staff, and generators failing. The raiders kill 3 people, steal the last supplies, and on November 14th, the last group of 5 people leave the clinic for Charleston. In November, Pleasant Valley asks for help from Charleston, but the emergency government by order of Tanner refuses to help, saying that there are not enough supplies for them either. This causes strong dissatisfaction among the people of Pleasant Valley. On November 21st, at Vault 51 on Baker's advice, Zax holds a democratic election for an overseer, but it fails because people vote mostly for themselves. On November 28th, the second elections of overseer fail, even though parties have been created. Robert inadvertently tells Zax that the best leader is the one who can best prove himself during the crisis. Also in November, a Wendigo called Night Stalker, attracted by loud music, drinking and dancing from the Sons of Dane, kills the members of the group one by one during several weeks until the group becomes completely exterminated. On December the 1st, the sales managers in the Vault-Tec bunker left it with the arrival of cold weather in the hope of reaching Harper's Ferry. December the 12th, Skig's gang raiders seize Haven Charge, killing refugees. Maybe it was the same gang that raided Berkeley Springs. On the same day, Firebat squad at the Monongah power plant managed to contact the command, which requested half of the squad. About 20 people remained at the station. Also during these 3 months, various shelters died: Wendigo Cave, Glass Caverns and Dolly Sots. From the latter, the refugees gradually left for Harper's Ferry and Berkeley Springs, as long as it made sense to go there. Burrows beneath Harper's Ferry is turned into an independent settlement. Tiger Thunder leaves the cave where they met the war to the training camp Venture, where they are planning to survive the winter. There is an armed seizure of power in the White Springs bunker by members of the Enclave, partly of whom the evacuated group consisted. All non-Enclave members were executed. Thus, the bunker became a full-fledged base of Enclave, managed by the Minister of Finance. In the Maryland prison, a gang of former convicts was formed under the leadership of Roper, the head of security. The gang is called Free Radicals. Survivors in the Palace of the Wind and Path create their own religious hippie cult. The Allegheny Asylum is turning into a full-fledged settlement. They even set up their own farm with chickens and a cow. Bogtown becomes the haven for various gangs of raiders who periodically try to pillage deserted Watauga. Makeshift vault didn't have time to be equipped properly before the war, so it died or was abandoned soon after the bombing. 2078, January 14th, the siege of the Monongah power plant begins. An unnamed group of raiders attacks the facility, kills several soldiers, and hangs their corpses on trees. On January 23rd, the third attempt of elections in Vault 51 fails. Zax completely abandons the idea of voting and begins to generate crisis, which according to Baker's wise words should determine the real strong leader. February the 2nd, the second attack on the Monongah power plant. 15 people remain alive. Before February 13th, a group of Brookensville cannibals appears near the Brookensville vault, setting ambushes on everyone who tries to get to it. They were so ferocious that they wore skins of the people they have killed. As they will not appear in history anymore, we can assume that they will die out after 2078. February 21st, there is a crisis in Vault 51. Zax forces the representatives of the upper class among the residents to sleep on the benches in clothes without mattresses and other amenities. One of the residents, Aiden Higgins, goes crazy and using homemade explosives tries to blow up the walls of the wall to get out, but he blows up on himself eventually. February 24th, a gang of Skigs in Haven Charge is killed when it's attacked by feral ghouls. Around March the 2nd or 3rd, Zax arranged a talent show. It changed the rules on the go, putting a prize as the opportunity to sleep in beds and not on the floor in one room. Of course, professional artists won. Because of Zax, the tension between people begins to grow. During the year, he constantly conducts such crises, pitting people against each other and driving them mad. He cheats during gambling games, giving victory and food rations to newcomers. He deprives residents of healthy sleep and caffeine, and so on. Zax also destroys people's relationships, allegedly giving out their secret affairs, provoking infidelity, and even editing the content of their correspondence to give a more negative background to its contents. March 12th, the third attack on the Monongah power plant. 12 soldiers remain. After March 12th, the scientists of Arctos Pharma descended into the underground laboratory complex after the incessant invasion of feral ghouls and the threatening radiation levels. However, ghouls managed to break into the complex too. When the group tried to repair the turrets, there was a failure and the turrets started shooting people. Thus, at the lowest level in the generator room, the last 8 people locked themselves in and subsequently died unable to get out or wait for help. At the same time, in March, raiders from Bogtown attack the Allegheny Asylum, take supplies and kill animals on the farm. A group of residents decided that they have nothing more to catch here and splits into two. One goes to Monongah and the other goes to Harper's Ferry. Considering that Monongah was never resettled after the war, the first group never reached the town. March 29th, Mel DeLarkin, a police officer in the city of Morgantown, reports to Charleston that Sheriff Mayfield is already starting to open fire on Regin and Marauderian students who are tearing up the city for supplies and fighting among themselves. Later, at the request of Abigail Poole, she moves to Charleston as a representative of Morgantown in the city parliament. All sorts of people are slowly coming to the Camp Venture at the call of Tiger Tea, who wants to expand the squad. Since Venture was a pre-war training camp for military and the Tiger Tea squad are not Boy Scouts, those who came are forced to undergo a fighter training course for initiation. In the spring, the raiders that terrorized the Monongah power plant create Ammo Dump Camp. On May 25th, the fourth and final attack on the Monongah power plant takes place. Only 9 soldiers remain alive who decide to leave. Raiders seized the station for looting. The troop of soldiers, Firebats, was never mentioned again. Most likely they either died in the wasteland or dispersed. On June 3rd, one of the residents of Vault 51 finds a gun planted by Zax. Around June 12th, the first murder takes place in Vault 51. Someone strangled a nurse. According to many records, the winter of 97-98 in the region was incredibly harsh. So much so that the last snow melted only in July. The winter has caused people to become savage in the mountains. They staged a massacre among themselves for resources, descended into murder and cannibalism. As a result, they became raiders. A gang of cutthroats led by Harlan McClintock is formed in Pleasant Valley. Also, a gang of gourmands is formed at Spruce Knob Resort, who continued to engage in cannibalism even when the food situation stabilized. Actually, they were feared in the region because of such atrocity. They had Maurice Stevens in charge with his wife Eddie. July 8th, raiders attack Riverside Mansion, the refuge of the Rivers family. They tried to rape Olivia, but Shannon, being trained for the role of a superhero, beat them all and killed the couple altogether. Something changed in Shannon's conscience from the experience, and she decides to find a noble use for her skills. She takes the image of a superheroine she played in the movies and sets herself the task of fighting bad people in a new harsh world. Olivia begins her own training course under the supervision of her mother. On July 27th, there is a shooting in the cafeteria of Vault 51, but before anyone got killed, Robert Baker managed to neutralize the aggressor. Baker accuses Zax for the weapon it's provided, to which it states that reducing the number of candidates will make it easier to choose a leader. August 1st, Zax led buzzing flies into the residential sector to annoy volunteers. After 72 hours of unsuccessful attempts to kill them, the residents managed to lose 3 more people. On August 3rd, there is a conflict between the Chambers couple and their lovers, who were also lovers of each other. Zax blocks all 4 of them in the room and issues weapons. As a result of the quarrel that escalated in the fight, everyone dies. When Ruben Gill and Helena Marks enter the room, Ruben notices that they will now get more food and receives Zax's recognition. August 6th, crisis number 37. Zax eligibly poisons Helena Marks, the only person who was the psychological and moral anchor for the refugees and also the object of Ruben's desire. Zax gives Ruben a weapon and he starts violence. Zax also issued weapons to other residents and pitted them against each other. Blood flowed and the only survivor in the slaughter was Ruben. In fact, Vault 51 ceased to exist on that day. Later in August, Shannon Rivers helps the caravan at Lewisburg repel a raider attack. Around September, after a bunch of systems had already stopped working in the Orwell Orchard bunker, radiation began to leak inside. During a family quarrel about the exodus, Jan Orwell locked his wife in a cage, but she managed to escape killing her husband. On October 23rd, a year after the war, Vault 94 opens. Residents begin to establish gardens outside the vault and send ambassadors to the wastelands in order to establish friendly contact with the settlements. In November, Shannon Rivers finds 4 orphans in the garage of her mansion, 3 girls including Clarissa and Eve DeVoyer, and a boy, Brody Torrance. Of these, she takes only girls into her care and drives the boy away. November 20th. Despite the fact that many of the ambassadors of Vault 94 died after reaching the raiders, one of the ambassadors establishes contact with Harper's Ferry. The mayor of the city, Miranda Vogt, sends a squad of 4 people to the vault. However, the squad has become too paranoid from the fact that there are no weapons in the vault and that they are peacefully greeted. They thought that they were walking into a trap and at some point their nerves gave out. They opened fire on the residents and killed them all. Then defying Gek and being convinced that this is a governmental machine for controlling consciousness, shoot it, which leads to a new nuclear explosion. New radioactive fallout combined with Gek fertilizers covered the region and caused an incredible boom in mutation of flora and fauna. The region began to turn into dangerous jungle, and it will be later called the Mire. Sometime after 2078, 2 responders come to the cutthroats without permission given by emergency government in the hope of establishing good neighborly contact. However, David Thorpe, the former top manager of Arctos Pharma, kills them for the supplies they took with them. He was at the resort with his mistress, the vulgar Rosalind Jeffries. The gang leader and his wife, Harland and Margie McClintock, are not pleased with senseless massacre, and they are going to judge David. However, there was a split in the gang. Many raiders are filled with hatred towards Charleston for abandoning them to their fate in the winter and take David's side. Still human, Harland and Margie, with a group of raiders who supported them, leave Pleasant Valley for the Sunny Top Resort, forming a new group, the Diehards. Although they are engaged in raiding activities, they do it for the sake of survival and try to avoid victims, killing only when it was necessary. For this pacifism, other raiders are constantly making fun of them. After a while, Harland dies and Margie takes the lead. David, on the other hand, becomes the leader of the cutthroats and inflates the level of cruelty by introducing the no negotiations rules. In other words, always shoot first and then there is basically no one to negotiate with. Charleston is losing control of Morgantown. Despite the fact that the authorities were still operating in the city, the anarchy that struck the minds of the students left no way to hold the city. There were a lot of Greek fraternity houses at the university, which, with the outbreak of the war, turned into separate factions and began to fight with each other for resources, including right-of-way supplies, since Morgantown was very contaminated with radiation. During the struggle, larger houses absorbed smaller ones, a kind of analog of feudalism, and so it went on until there were two larger houses in the city. The roof house, which held the monorail branch and the roofs of the buildings, and the street house, which controlled the streets. The war between them was very long and brutal. In the White Springs bunker, Enclave realized that there is no connection to either Raven Rock Base in Virginia or Pasadena Station in the west. Thus, they become an autonomous fragment of the organization. As a result of radiation exposure, according to Thomas Sackert, the Minister of Agriculture, the Minister of Finance dies, and according to the hierarchical chain, it is Thomas who becomes the acting President of the United States and the head of Enclave. He immediately set a course to continue the war with China until a guaranteed victory, and therefore suggested that those who do not want to fight get up and leave the bunker on false sides. However, it was a trick. In fact, they were all executed in the next room, including one of the two generals. As a result, only 49 people remained in the bunker. In the Eastern Penitentiary, all prisoners turned into ghouls. Harrison Malone escapes to his gang, which has remained active in the region. Somewhere between the end of 78 and the summer of 79, one of the Free States groups comes out of the bunker and occupies empty Thunder Mountain power plant. They left before the organized exodus of Free States and managed to dig in at the station, subsequently repelling several attacks of raiders. In addition to cutthroats, diehards, gourmands, and groups of unidentified raiders east of the Appalachian Mountains, Blackwater bandits appeared in the Blackwater mine, who were skilled thieves, led by Freddie Lang. Another group of raiders was also formed, Trappers, under the control of Walter Griswold. Trappers are survivalists, hunters, and lovers of traps, including explosive ones. They establish a camp in the mountains called the Devil's Backbone. In addition to the Pleasant Valley base, cutthroats establish outposts and camps: Garrahan Outpost, North Cutthroat Camp, Bleeding Kate Grind House, South Cutthroat Camp, and the Sludge Hole. A group of vicious scientists was alive at least until 2079, since at the end of 2078 there was an explosion in Vault 94, which provoked a mutation of the local flora. Roots and vines of some bizarre plants began to grow in the railway tunnel, blocking the passages and causing a lot of inconvenience to the scientists. They tried to poison the plants, but instead polluted the water purification system with poison and died themselves. January the 1st of 2079, the survivors at the White Springs Resort are forced to leave their shelter as a result of the automated reconstruction process of the resort that has begun, which has blocked all the rooms and forced everyone outside using robots. But the group knew about this in advance, so they calmly planned where they would go. One group went to Charleston, and the other group, consisting of particularly rich and arrogant guests not wanting to mix with the marginalized and poor in Charleston, went to Pleasant Valley to reunite with people of their class. But they didn't know that everyone at the resort has become raiders for a long time, so most likely the newcomers were simply killed and robbed. The third group seized the neighboring building of the golf club, although a pack of feral ghouls soon came and the group was slaughtered. Between July 15th and August 6th, after receiving a signal from Raleigh Clay that everything is clear, Free States leave their bunkers and, having received a request for help, humiliating for the mayor of Harper's Ferry, moved to the city. All bunkers except Sam Blackwell's bunker, Gavin McCulloch's cabin, and the Sunday Brothers' cabin are abandoned. The Sunday Brothers, although they appear occasionally in Harper's Ferry, continue to live on their farm. Although formally Harper's Ferry remains under the control of the mayor of the city and the Free States were assimilated, everyone perceives Harper's Ferry as the base of Free States. In addition, before August the 6th, Tiger Teeth Thunder arrived at the Thunder Mountain and seized it, allowing the members of Free States who were there to leave it bloodlessly. After Shannon Rivers has recruited enough orphan girls, she founds the Order of Mysteries, an organization designed to fight villains. All the girls are trained in a training camp in the dungeon of the mansion. The mansion itself becomes their base. The capabilities of the base made it possible to create special equipment for field missions that would help operatives always stay in the shadows and act unnoticed, according to the lore of that superhero movie. The main strategy was to be in complete secrecy. No one was even supposed to know about their existence. This, coupled with the developed hierarchy system, training program, coordination with each other, and preparation for missions, made this organization a very dangerous neighbor for the raiders. Sometime after 2079, the cities of Mostown and Treetops are founded by members of Free States. Having grown stronger with the arrival of Free States, Harper's Ferry begins to establish allied and trade relationships with settlements, including with these two and with burrows, which they found literally under their feet. Tiger Teeth Thunder has been in touch with Roger Maxon all this time. Maxon was leading Brotherhood of Steel in Lost Hills for 2 years already, and was trying for a long time to persuade Tiger Teeth to accept this ideology and turn her faction into remote Brotherhood's detachment. Tiger Teeth resisted this idea, but eventually accepted and reformatted her militarized group, which by the way was constantly expanding due to new recruits arriving at Camp Venture. Not everyone was happy with all this stuff of paladins, knights, elders, scribes and other attributes. However, since nothing much was additionally required, for the most part only to accept new titles, in principle everyone got used to it. The transformation of the Tiger Standard into the Brotherhood of Steel Appalachia occurred between 79 and 82. 2080, a little earlier, before May 2nd, Harper's Ferry establishes a contact with responders from Charleston and enters into an alliance with them. In July, Enclave takes an empty West Tech facility and continues research and experiments with FIV. On August 25th, one of the 5 scientists who didn't fulfill the research quota dies in Vault 96. The remaining 4 are trying to infect the supercomputer with a virus, but it takes the upper hand and kills them on August 31st. Vault 96 has fallen. 2081. On September 11th, another group of refugees from Free States founded the Treehouse Village when they began pursued by raiders, climbed trees and ambushed bandits. They decided to stay there. To establish a settlement, they dragged all sorts of building materials and created a village on trees, connecting them together with catwalks. A couple of days later, Gavin McCulloch's group joins them, leaving their cabin. Judging by the fact that on November 2nd, Free States are already conducting their own training at the Camp Venture, I think they have invited the Brotherhood of Steel to their alliance with Charleston. On November 19th, under the onslaught of raiders, the Treehouse Village had to be abandoned, its residents relocated to Harper's Ferry. Before 2082, a group of nuclear scientists established the Pylon V13 camp, using as a basis a monorail support and a train stuck on the line. In the camp, they are setting up an experiment to break the space-time continuum. They do not succeed and they all die. Because of the radiation and toxic fumes that flooded the Toxic Valley after the war and the constant attacks of mutated animals, Clarksburg dies out. Many residents leave for Morgantown. 2 of the last 3 residents die in the attack of Yawagai. The city of Beckley experiences a similar fate and gets abandoned. Enclave seizes Virginia with the attack led by Agent Grey, killing forgotten guerrillas of the Chinese People Army and privatizing their developments, from 3rd-generation stealth boys to liberated robots. Judging by the skeletal remains of some raiders, Amadam dies out somewhere before 2082. A haven for raiders to the east of the mountains, Bogtown, also dies out due to the declining activity of raiders, provisions and places to loot. Meanwhile, the raiders in the mountains are beginning to form alliances. Actually, the first attempt turned into bloodshed at Spruce Snow Plague. During a meeting of negotiating groups of cutthroats and diehards, an alteration occurred that escalated into a showdown. But they still managed to assemble an alliance, which included 5 raider clans: cutthroats, diehards, gourmands, trappers and Blackwater bandits. According to one of the conditions, they had a common cache with swag, where they put their most valuable loot, and they had a code divided into 5 parts, which were owned by the leaders of the groups, so they needed to support each other. David Thorpe, as the leader of the strongest gang, led the whole alliance. However, the alliance quickly realized that their idea was full of idiocy, since when any gang or a leader die, they all lose their part of their code and so their entire cash. Blackwater bandits started to deal with troubles quite early. One of the raiders accidentally breaks an old pipe in their mine, from which radiation leaks. Over time, the bandits' health begins to deteriorate, and they get even more hooked on chemicals that cutthroats supply them. As payment for their impressive debt, they agree to steal a mini nuke from the Brotherhood of Steel and give it to Thorpe. One very insidious man managed to repeat in Saturn what the notorious Jim Jones achieved in real world. He appeared in the city as the Messiah and turned the residents of the city into his religious commune. After that, he managed to poison people who had lost their vigilance during one of the church services in order to profit from their belongings. There was also Seneca gang, which had its own camp, but considering that they are not connected with the Raider Alliance in any way, most likely they died early enough. Residents of Helvetia receive information from one trader that a gang of reavers is coming to their city. Then they decide to evacuate urgently and build a new settlement, Horizon West, on the wreckage of a nearby crashed plane. This happened before 2082, since the Reaver gang, like Seneca, clearly did not live to see the formation of alliance of gangs. The Deep still continues to operate as an active base of the Chinese People Army, but all personnel were gullified due to radiation. It is unknown when the following locations appeared and died and to which raider gang they belonged: Johnson's Acre, Vantage, Skullbone Vantage, Reaper Alley, Cliff Watch, Crevasse Dam, Billboard Junk Camp, Middle Mountain Cabins and Freak Show. Perhaps they belong to cutthroats or other large gangs. 2082. It is known that on January 10th, the responders of Charleston already had fighting clashes with supermutants of Huntersville, which are beginning to gradually spread across the territory. The Brotherhood of Steel establishes a new main base, Fort Defiance, on the site of the abandoned Allegheny Asylum, to where they transfer their HQ from Thunder Mountain. A new member of the Brotherhood, Scribe Grant McNamara, restores electricity, generators, installs equipment, and generally puts the base in order, for what he immediately earns himself a high place in the organization. Towards the end of the war, reinforcements arrived at the White Springs bunker. Colonel Alan Santiago came from Washington, leading a group of loyal soldiers and refugees. On December 10th, there is another conflict between Abigail Poole and Tanner Holbrook in Charleston, as a result of blackmail by Abigail on the subject of bringing the Selectorate with supplies before the elections in 2083. Tanner agrees to arrange the first Christmas in the city and donate the stashed supplies. December 24th, cutthroats thought they already had enough strength to attack Charleston. They organized a raid led by Thorpe's girlfriend, Rosalind. The raid turned out to be unsuccessful. Rosalind is captured and subjected to interrogation. David Thorpe finds out about the failure and thinks that Rosalind is dead. Then he decides to take revenge. A day later, on December 25th, on Christmas Eve, Mel DeLarkin goes with a delegation to Pleasant Valley for negotiations, wanting to exchange Rosalind for a pact of non-aggression. However, they never went far away, as what will be called the Christmas Flood happens. David Thorpe, using a mini nuke that Blackwater Bandit stole for him earlier, blows up the Summersville Dam, which held water in the lake of the same name. Surging water flooded Charleston. Thousands of people died, including members of the government, Tanner, Abigail, and captive Rosalind Jeffries. Some of the responders and residents survived, and in the following weeks they became busy sorting out the rubble and rescuing the wounded. For the destruction of Charleston, Order of Mysteries declares war on cutthroats, but they clearly do not do it publicly, just whispering among themselves, obviously. That concludes the analysis of the first historical stage of the Appalachian region. In the next episode, the time period from 2083 to 2086 will be analyzed. Remember, for the large-scale war of the Order of Mysteries with the Raiders, the war of people with super mutants, and the emergence of a new terrible threat, Scorch Beasts. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please consider giving it a like, subscribe, hit the bell and leave a comment. That will definitely help the project. Also check all the links below. They include the Google Earth map, the lore compendium, and the text version of this video. Also, the text version includes the statistics of settlements and factions for those who love numbers. That's all for today. If you notice that the water from your sink tastes strange and there is a newly built biogenetic laboratory on the outskirts of your town, you know what to do. See you in the wastelands, wanderers. Fishers out.